Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is an incredible series, sure to give you chills, and from the incredible mind of AgonyBlue, from over on Reddit, No Sleep. As ever though, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further, and why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled When I was 6 years old, my sister disappeared during a hike on a family camping trip in Yosemite. Yesterday, she was found alive, and it's been 15 years since the day she disappeared. Part 1. Let's get straight into that. It was a forest ranger that had called it in. She had been found at the edge of an isolated campsite in the well-known national forest. The campers, horrified, called 911 when they saw my sister emerge from the forest on all fours, caked in dirt and blood. She was so starved and deformed that the campers told 911 that an emaciated bear was tearing apart their cooler and fisting handfuls of raw meat. The forest ranger who found her was from the same small town as us, of Grovefield, California, about 26 miles outside of Yosemite National Park, and he recognized her under all that dirt and grime. The orange guest shirt from the story of the girl who went missing in his graduating class, and that's when he called my parents. I wasn't with them when I got the call from the local hospital that the forest ranger had immediately transported my sister to. I was nearby a community business college. It had been my 21st birthday last night, and I'd woken up with a monstrous hangover. My bed was strewn with bottles of Everclear and Malibu, and a thin layer of fine powder of something covered my nightstand. I immediately downed a Xanax, chased it with a black cherry White Claw. The only time I'd left my apartment all day was when the DoorDash dropped off my McDonald's meal of shame, and I had to meet them at my building's gate. They found your sister. My mother was incoherent on the phone, and I could barely hear her over the hysterical sobbing. She's at the Tulalumne General Hospital. You need to come immediately. We'll pay for an Uber. And I felt my body go cold. That's not possible, I whispered. It's been 15 years since she disappeared. That's not her. It's her. She was hysterically crying. They did a DNA test. It's her. She's alive. There was a reporter waiting outside the hospital as I pulled up. The forest ranger had let it slip to his girlfriend. That distress call he answered was for Paula Richards, the girl that went missing in their high school class, and the news had gotten out. Grovefield was small, with a population of only 1,000 people, and it was a one-stop-like kind of town, with a police station on one road and the forest on the other. Everybody knew everybody, and they were my school teachers, nurses, babysitters, the local candy shop owners, and as with any small town, they protected their own and kept everybody else out. Grovefield keeps its business close and its people even closer, as my grandfather used to say. So when my sister disappeared 15 years ago, Grovefield kept the news quiet. Only one lone reporter from the nearby town of Jamestown caught wind of what was happening and snuck into Grovefield for their story. And this is what he reported. 15 years ago, almost to the day, Paula Richard disappeared without a trace during a hike with her parents and sister. She was beautiful, beloved, and a rising star and the high school track star, with D2 universities competing to sign her. It was her spring break and she was on a week-long camping trip with her parents and younger sister in the nearby Yosemite National Park. Her parents were avid outdoorsmen, as they had backpacked and camped all over the majority of US national parks and had instilled that same preparedness and love for the wilderness into 15-year-old Paula. On the day of her disappearance, it was a Monday morning, and they were hiking to Glacier Point, using the Taft Point and the Fisher's Trail. The trail they'd chosen was mostly flat. It was a 2-mile-long hike through wildflower-filled meadows before dipping through the occasional patch of thick woods leading to the south rim of the Yosemite Valley. Paula and her parents could handle it no problem, but Amy, Paula's 6-year-old sister, kept wanting to turn back. In hindsight, this trail was probably too difficult for a 6-year-old, especially since, according to the police reports, her parents had reportedly claimed that Amy slept poorly the night before, crying that she could hear something crawling outside her tent. According to the parents, about 20 minutes in, Amy started sobbing hysterically, like full-on frenzied screams, dug her heels into the dirt and refused to step an inch further into the forest. At this point, Paula and her family were standing in a low wildflower-filled valley, right at the edge of the patch of dense forest. That's when Paula volunteered to take her back. Her parents agreed, and Paula clipped Amy's leash onto her own backpack and turned to walk back. The campsite was less than a mile away. Her parents felt confident and assured Paula, who had been thoroughly coached in wilderness survival and first aid, that she could handle that short walk back. Paula was last seen wearing a bright orange Guess long-sleeve t-shirt, something she had deliberately worn since it was visible from miles away. 8 minutes later, they heard Paula scream. Gone. Vanished, with only her sobbing, incoherent, hysterical younger sister left to tell her parents what happened. As I pulled up to the entrance, the reporter spotted me, and he descended like flies to a dead body. "Miss Richards, Amy Richards, have you seen your sister yet? How is she? Is she talking? Can she tell us what happened?" His camera bulbs popped and flashed, blinding me, and I was momentarily disorientated. Suddenly, I felt a firm grip on my arm. "Move, you fucking asshole!" And I was yanked unceremoniously from the Uber and away from the horrendous reporter. "You okay, hon? That goddamn guy has been out there all day, hassling anybody going in or out." It was my dad's friend Ron, an EMT at this hospital. "Hi, Ron. I'm okay." I shrugged. After all, it's not like this is my first time. He eyed me carefully. "Right, so I guess, is it really her?" I mustered a grin. "Apparently so, according to the DNA test my parents had done immediately. I think Tom, the family lawyer, is checking again though." "How? After 15 years? He trailed off, noticing the look on my face. "Hey, are you sure you're doing okay?" And I faked a light-hearted chuckle. "Thank you for caring, but don't worry about me. I'm doing my best to keep mental breakdowns to a minimum. Speaking of which, where is she?" "Room 82, 3rd floor. He hesitated. "Amy?" Yes?" "Please, be careful." And my face felt tight as I forced a grin. "Don't worry, Ronnie." And I pointed to the silver locket from my childhood around my neck. "I got my lucky charm right here." Well, it suddenly looked like her, but like a gaunt, emaciated, withered version of what I had always imagined my sister would look like. I hurt to look at her. Her blue eyes dulled, sunk low in their sockets. Her cheeks were painfully sunken too, giving her the overall look of a walking, breathing skeleton. Her skin was ashy and, from what I could see, covered in open sores. Her beautiful blonde ringlets, from my memory, were gone. Her hair was horribly thinned, with only a light fringe left on her crown. I pushed past my parents and through the crowd of nurses and specialists. My stomach twisted and churned from anxiety. Fuck, she was awake. "Hey, big sissy," I slowly said, using my old nickname for her. "Do you remember me? It's been a while." She didn't look like how I remembered. Instead of the bright, beautiful older sister, a broken shell had returned to us. She also smelled horrible, pungent, rangy and ripe, like a dead body that's been left to rot in the sun. I brought you something." I pulled it from my pocket. It was a bag of Hershey's Kisses. "Remember how much you used to like these?" I fought back tears. She was staring up at me, unblinkingly. Every few seconds or so, her right eye would twitch. And without breaking eye contact, she slowly reached for it. My heart twisted. She was missing all the fingernails on her right hand. "Amy Richards." I whipped around. "Yes?" It was her doctor. Could you please step outside for a moment?" He held a clipboard for me. "If you're going to be visiting, I need you to sign these forms." "Visiting hours" was written in bold on the first page. "What's this?" I asked. And Dr. Jenkins pointed at Paula. "It's for her. Her visiting hours are going to be limited. After spending 15 years away from civilization, her natural immune system could be overwhelmed by even the most basic viral infection. Plus, we'll be starting treatment for her leukemia soon end. Wait, leukemia? I gasped. She has cancer? Dr. Jenkins paused and glanced first at his colleagues. Dr. J was a family friend. He'd been both me and Paula's primary doctor for years, and my parents loved him. Stage 1 or 2, he said in hushed tones. We're not sure, but still very treatable, although in her condition, recovery's gonna be tough. I glanced over. Paula was still staring at me. I pulled out my pill bottle and popped another little white bar. Doc, what happened to her? I felt my heart tearing apart in two. She looks like she's decaying. Dr. Jenkins watched me swallow the pill, but said nothing. He looked pensive, worried. Amy, she's severely malnourished. Whatever she was eating out there, well, it wasn't enough. She's severely dehydrated too. We suspect she has severe anemia, but won't know for certain until more tests come back. That's it? Just severe anemia? There's also evidence of a significant brain injury here, at the base of her skull. He pointed to the back of his head. It's healed now, but at some point she sustained a deep blunt force injury. He sighed. We think that's why she didn't find her way out. The concussion she sustained would have scrambled her sense of direction. That, plus the terrible winters and the lack of nutrients. It affects more than just the body. It affects the mind, too. I glanced over at her. Paula was still watching me through the little glass window in a hospital room. The baby hairs on the back of my neck were tingling. You saying she went crazy? What I'm saying is... He sighed again. Well, we can only imagine what happened to her out there. After a week in hospital, my parents wanted her home. It was like they were afraid she would disappear again. The doctors fought against it, of course, said her health was extremely fragile and needed constant round-the-clock care. My parents, willing to compromise, but unwilling to back down completely, hired a live-in nurse to keep track of Paula's treatment. And because Paula was still pretty bedridden, the nurse gave Paula a bell to ding when she needed assistance. Paula's room was right next to mine, and all I could hear was the bell ringing at all hours of the night. It was making me reconsider my decision to stay for the next couple of months. And Paula's room was exactly the same as it was 15 years ago. Pink walls covered in NSYNC posters, Bow Wow, and the Backstreet Boys, and a signed poster of her all-time hero, Michael Jordan. An enormous corkboard filled with ribbons and Polaroid pictures with her teammates was hung over her desk. Big, white beanbags lay stacked in the corner, and there were piles of CDs scattered in a semicircle around them. My parents had preserved her room, like a butterfly in amber, so that everything was exactly how she left. It's like they were waiting for her to come home. It's why we never moved from our childhood home in Grovefield 2, even when things became unbearable. And when the small town scrutiny became too much, my parents still refused to let go. It was incredibly eerie. Now, about a week after my parents took my sister home from the hospital, I was coming home from the local library when I walked in to see police in my living room. When my sister disappeared, her story rocked our town. She was a beloved, brilliant and talented teenager who babysat for all the new mothers and helped organize church picnics and book clubs, and she had gone missing in broad daylight. The sole witness and absolute last person to see her alive was her hysterical, inconsolable younger sister, who, unfortunately, couldn't remember a thing. The police suspected my dad at first. They hauled him in, despite the fact he had a solid alibi and was clearly beside himself over her disappearance. The town branded him a killer, and that he was running a sex slave ring in the wilderness and was feeding the girls to a cannibal cult. The police eventually had to release a statement admitting their fault in suspecting him, but the rumours had continued to spread. After all, the truth isn't what people care about. What did the cops want? My mum had her head buried in her arms, and my dad was pacing around the kitchen. They want to know what we know, my father said, sitting down at the table. And if we have any more information. What did you tell them? I asked pensively. That she's back home. That she somehow got confused and lost out there, and then survived 15 years on her own, despite all our efforts to find her, only to make it back to the same place she originally disappeared from, and that the young forest ranger Recognized her from high school? But he shook his head. Fuck. The thing we should do an interview. We say our piece. We give them a headline and then the town will calm down. And he looked haggard. We can't let it escalate like last time. We have to control the narrative, set the record straight. I snorted. Dad, it's been 15 years. I'm pretty sure there's no record anymore. Plus, I continued, my voice breaking. What's the story going to be about? That we brought this stranger home? She barely eats, she doesn't sleep? I said, sick to my stomach. I haven't seen her sleep once. She doesn't even speak to us. Not one word. My mother's sobs punctured the tension like gunshots. Don't call her a stranger. And she hiccuped loudly and took another swig from a bottle she was holding. We have been given a second chance from God to be whole again. The last 15 years. And snot and tears streaked across her flushed face. Our angel has come back to us. We are fixing our broken family. If only she hadn't. A painfully familiar, overwhelming sense of frustration suddenly boiled hot in my stomach. If only what, Mother? I bitterly said. If only I hadn't made her turn back with me? I watched as she desperately avoided eye contact. Is that what you were going to say? And she opened her mouth to retort, but the damage, I was done. I knocked the whiskey bottle that had become a permanent fixture in her hands for the last 15 years and stormed upstairs. Suddenly, I heard a gentle knock on my door. It had been a few hours since I stormed upstairs, and I half expected my dad to storm up after me, but nothing. Go away, I moaned. I heard shuffling outside, like someone was dragging their feet. My ears perked up, and I felt my skin start to crawl. Hello? Who is it? For a second, I thought it was Amelia, the nurse we'd hired. But no, she actually has the night off tonight. Again, another gentle knock. Hello? I said again, this time louder. My heart leapt into my throat. Without further ado, I jumped off the bed and strode over to my door and whipped it open. Nothing. I looked down, and suddenly a wave of bile threatened to rise from my stomach. In the carpet, right outside my door, lay a small, crushed wildflower. I knew what everyone thought, that it was my fault my sister disappeared, and that I was hiding something because I couldn't tell the cops what I'd seen, and that I was lying when I said I didn't know what happened. But the truth is, it wasn't that I couldn't tell the cops. It was that I had already tried, and they didn't believe me. When my parents heard Paula scream, they came sprinting back, but it was already too late. Paula was gone, and I was curled up in a hollow of a tree, with a yellow backpack leash wrapped around my throat. The leash was blood-stained and torn, and caught deep in the threads of the nylon, with 5 fresh fingernails torn at the root. A DNA testing later determined that they were Paula's fingernails. I don't remember much of that day, but when my parents would reluctantly recount the story to me, they would say I kept saying one thing over and over. It was a deer monster, Mama. A deer monster took Paula. My parents took me to therapy about a month after her disappearance. My mother didn't believe in therapy, saying it was against God and the church, but seeing how depressed and withdrawn I'd gotten, she agreed to give it a chance. My mother refused to let me see anybody local, and she was afraid of what I'd say and what would spread around the town. And so the police had to bring in someone from the 3 towns away. Our session lasted only 15 minutes, and my mother never took me back again. I had been sitting there, drawing, when a therapist walked in. The police and my parents were watching through a 2-way mirror. I only remember that the room was cold and white, and that the crayons had been the brightest thing in that room. And they told me to draw what I saw that day, and I did. But there was a small stick figure for me, a big stick figure for Paula, and something else too. A towering figure with deep red eyes and horns that stood so close to Paula they were practically touching. In fact, I had drawn them holding hands. It took up almost the entire page. Hi, Amy, the therapist said, a bright tone trying to hide the level of concern that was bleeding through. What is this? The devil took Paula, I said simply. That's what I saw. My mother, beside herself, pulled me from the therapy. I was given a prescription for duloxetine and Xanax instead. I was only 6 years old, so of course I had a hard time adjusting to the medication. Maybe that's why I was awake that particular night. It was a couple of days after the fateful therapy session, and I found myself suddenly wide awake and at 3 in the morning. It was a full moon, and I looked outside, and there was a girl standing at our back fence. It was dark, but in the light of the full moon, I could see her bright, orange, long-sleeved guest shirt. It was as if she felt me looking at her. Her head snapped towards me, moving at a shockingly fast speed, and she waved, and I stood there, frozen, unable to wave back. She waved again, then, slowly, she pointed to the fence. It was as if she wanted me to come and unlock it, and I didn't move. I shook my head again, harder. I remember her watching me for a minute, for 5 minutes, and then for what felt like an hour. Then, slowly, she turned around and walked away. Her head rolled loosely on her neck, flopping around, as if it couldn't stay upright. It's been almost 6 hours since I stormed upstairs, but I hadn't yet left my room. I thought about it, considered running for the door. I thought about texting my only friend, my dealer, and telling him to pick me up. But every time, I chickened out. Shuffle. Shuffle. Later. I'd run later. But right now, I could hear her pacing right outside my door. When I was 6 years old, my sister disappeared during a hike on a family camping trip in Yosemite. Part 2. Let's get straight into that. Hi everyone. I apologise it's taken me so long to follow up. It's been a few days since I first told you about Paula, and I've been meaning to update you as quickly as possible. It's my fault. I've been feeling worse since Paula came back. I'm not sure how to explain it, except that it feels like I've chugged 6 monster energies. I'm tired, yet weirdly energized. I feel disconnected, unplugged, and drained. Like if I'm not careful, I'll drift away in a second. Or maybe this has something to do with the Xanax prescription I've had since I was 6 years old. Whatever it is, it's only gotten worse. Because of this, I developed a habit of taking meticulous notes, writing in journals, voice recorders, filming myself. I became obsessed with tracking every second of my day. And from those notes, I compile those notes into an all-encompassing story that I then record online for my benefit. Now, I'm going to be posting it on Reddit for all of you. Also, thank you to whoever suggested setting up a camera to film my room. The footage that I captured was utterly horrifying. I told myself I had to wait till dark to run, that I'd make a break for it. In the back of my closet was an old motion-activated trail camera that my parents and I used to use while hunting. Also back there was an enormous flashlight and an emergency collapsible ladder. Perks of having parents that were practically doomsday preppers. It's been almost 10 hours since I stormed upstairs from the conversation I had with my parents. We both said some cruel and hurtful things to each other, and I half expected them to storm up after me. I wouldn't have wanted to talk, but I would have appreciated the olive branch. The fucking gesture. But no, they had left about 2 hours ago, around 10 o'clock. The white Escalade roared as it started up, and I listened as it slowly faded away to nothing. It's midnight now, and they haven't come back. Shit. Arjun. I mumbled. Fuck. The chime sounded loud in that tomb-like silence of my room. I quickly silenced my phone as my heart stopped, and I held my breath and watched as the shadows paused underneath my door. Shuffle. She was still out there. My hands were shaking, and I forced them to be still, as I delicately propped the camera against the stack of books. I adjusted it slightly. There. If anything happened, if anything came through that door, it would go straight to my phone. I saw my phone light up again, this time silently. It was Arjun, my friend. Arjun was a childhood friend of mine, lived with his parents' rental property about 15 minutes from my parents' house. Now, we'd grown up together. We did everything together. We'd even lived on the same street since kindergarten. He was a Thelma to my Louise, the peanut butter to my jelly, even after every pill So he didn't question why I needed a ride, and he didn't question why I needed him to park in the alley behind my house. I hoisted the emergency fire ladder up and threw it over the windowsill. It clattered loudly to the ground, and I winced as it almost hit the windshield of Argent's beloved dark red Pontiac. The cool, crisp October air rushed in, and my fingers froze as I braced myself against the frame of my window. My stomach dropped as I looked down. But before I could take a further step, suddenly I heard a noise behind me. My blood ran cold. I recognized that fucking sound anywhere. The camera. I whipped my head around, the giant blue duffel bag blocking my view. I strained to see around it, twisted my neck to look past it. It blocked my view, but I could still see as Paula, or whatever it was, slowly started to slide their hand underneath my bedroom door. Hand on Bible, I never moved so fast before in my life. Paula's hand was sliding under the door, and I was standing in front of my bedroom door, and I could see myself in a full-length mirror that was attached to the back. My skin was pale, drained of any colour. My brown, curly hair was wild, and my dark green eyes were wide and scared. I was trying to move, but my legs felt like they were glued to the carpet. I tried to move. I could see Paula's fingers inching closer, closer to me. And I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Help me! I wanted to scream. Help me! Help me! Help! Amy? Amy! Huh. I snapped back to reality. Arjun was standing in the doorway of his kitchen, a coffee in hand, and his pug Milo strapped to his chest in a baby-born carrier. Sorry, rough night. Yeah, I figured. He bustled into the kitchen. His blue robe flapped as he pulled out the toaster and slammed it on the counter. His black hair was slicked back, his tan skin looked moisturized, and he looked surprisingly coiffed for it being 7:30 in the morning. So, you want to tell me what the fuck is going on? And I swallowed uneasily. I tucked away the small black book that I was scribbling in. What do you mean? He threw me an intensely condescending look. Milo, the pug, had the audacity to copy it. How long have we been friends? 17 years? You don't think I can read you like an open book? You're welcome to stay, but I need more information. For example, I didn't know you were back. Why aren't you at your apartment? What's happening with college? He brought over a plate of toast, setting it just out of reach. You get the toast after you talk. Something inside of me broke. Everything I'd been holding back from last night, hell, from the last month, came rushing out of me like a flood. My head fell to my hands and sobs violently shook my entire body. Monroe, Argent's gorgeous pitch-black husky, came trotting over and put her head on my knee, and she whimpered softly. Whoa, Amy, Paula came back. Argent's face froze. You're joking? Is this a sick joke? His face was like stone. Paula? The older sister who disappeared when we were 6? My face was beet red, and a mess of snot streams and wet tears. A ranger found her at the campsite in Yosemite. She was at the hospital for about a week before my parents took her home. I think my parents and the cops are keeping it quiet because nobody knows. She's been at my house. With me. And I hiccuped. But things... Fuck, Arjun. Sobs ripped apart my chest, and I tried to steady myself, placing both palms on the cool kitchen table. Fuck. Things have been weird since she got back. Arjun went extremely still, and he was looking at me oddly too, like he knew something I didn't. Weird how? I can't explain. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Please just watch this. The timestamp on the video read 3:01 a.m. The screen flickers once, then twice, and then finally settles. It's pitch black, and it's hard to figure out what we were looking at. But I knew. It's the feed from the trail camera I left behind on my bedroom floor. Amy? Okay, I'm confused. Arjun said, exasperated. What are we watching? Shh, I said softly. Just watch. At 3:02 a.m., movement. The door is shaking violently. For at least 30 seconds, the door is practically rattling off its hinges. Fortunately, there's no sound in the video. And then suddenly, it stops. Nothing. No movement. The camera flicks off. Half a second later, the camera flicks back on, and there's something trying to slide underneath the door. It's so dark, so it's difficult to see what it is, but then the camera focuses. It's a hand. Paula's trying to slide her hand back underneath the door. And Paula's crouching on the ground, trying to slide her hand under. Her hand is facing down, and it stops hard at her wrist. She can't get any further in. But then it doesn't stop. Her hands stretches into my room. Her wrist is almost a foot long now, stretched unnaturally thin. Her fingers, bent like spiders, are pulling themselves along the baseboards, as if searching for something. And she starts stretching upwards. Her hand stretches out of frame, but I know what she is reaching for. And the door suddenly swings open, and her emaciated, unnaturally thin arm retracts like a tongue, back into the snake's mouth. Nothing. 30 seconds pass. The hallway is as dark as my room, and then suddenly, there she is. She's crouched down, walking on all fours. Her arms and legs are bent unnaturally, pushing her belly against the floor, and she's moving slowly, as if in pain. I can't figure out why until the camera focuses on her, closer, and she's creeping in on her fingertips. And suddenly, she notices the camera. Her eyes, glowing white, focus on the red recording light. And she reaches out, and the camera falls, and the screen goes black. Another silence. It was suffocating. I was watching Arjun's face, but it was unreadable, like stone. Worse than stone, like a dam, its concrete face holding back a torrent of emotion. And finally, he spoke. "What in the everlasting fuck was that, Amy?" I held back a sob. "I left the trail camera in my room before I left with you. It's activated by motion. I wanted to see if Paula, well, whatever that is, if she would." Arjun held up his hand. I could see his fingers, or they were trembling. "You're telling me?" He pointed to the black iPhone screen. "That's Paula." And I hesitated for a moment, trying to read his face. He thinks I'm crazy, I thought to myself. He see me at my worst, coming off a blackout, lying in my puke in a bathtub. He doesn't believe me. But I steadied myself. "Yes, Arjun," I said softly. "That's Paula." And his face was completely blank. It had always been unreadable like that, even when we were kids. Out of our little group of friends, Arjun had always had the best poker face. But we always joked that when his face got blank, it meant he was figuring out something, and that he knew something we didn't. "So," Arjun finally said softly, "there's something I need to show you. In the basement." Arjun lived in one half of a duplex at the edge of town. He had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, all to himself. And it was great. It was actually owned by his parents who, for years, used to do long-term rentals with tourists who wanted to stay close to Yosemite National Park for summer. But they stopped when Arjun started high school, and he moved in instead. He lived here on and off since then, even deciding to stay after graduation, and instead chose to commute to his classes at the nearby Columbia College. We used to throw some righteous parties here. Down here. We walked down the staircase to the basement. There were pictures of us lining the walls. Me, Arjun, Mikey, Louise. My heart twanged uncomfortably. Next to Louise was a best friend from softball, Patrice. Next to Patrice was Jack. I looked down and it was still hard looking at him, even these few years later. There were so many pictures of us. They were playing Little League T, playing Red Rover in the park, and building our treehouse in the forbidden part of the forest behind Louise's house, getting milkshakes at Lucky D's diner. And there was me in my emo phase, with a face full of smeared makeup and a head full of ratty hair extensions. And there was Louise winning medal after medal in softball. I frowned. These were from high school. Where was I? Yes, I was high. "Hey, Amy, focus. You zoned out again." And I snapped back. The door to the basement was padlocked. Arjun looked deadly serious. "There's something I need to tell you," he whispered. "But you have to promise me that you won't tell a soul what I'm about to show you." My body felt cold. "Of course, I promise," I whispered. "I promise on Paula." He watched me for a second, his dark eyes searching mine, and then nodded. With a soft clank, the padlock opened and they flipped on the lights. And the first thing I noticed was an enormous corkboard filling almost the entire back wall. It was filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and large slips of paper with dates on them. 1962, 1977, 1992, and then 2007, read the slips of paper, and below was crammed with newspaper clippings and printouts from the internet. Alien spaceship takes another. Finally evidence of Bigfoot. Jamestown halfway house reports another missing. The clippings screamed at me. Large photographs of men, women and kids were all stuffed into crowded space. They looked like pictures pulled from yearbooks, mugshots, and random Facebook pages. Bits of red yarn were strung between the photographs and dates, and there, right in the center of the board, were 10 large photographs, and they were labeled with large, blocky handwriting. Missy Pulte, Donna Tepin, Mary Saunders, Christine Polanski, Daphne Tiths, and I trailed off. Paula Richards. Arjun? I breathed, turning to him. You're looking for the missing girls? Not missing, he said grimly, his bright smile gone. Gone. Dead. I felt sick. Arjun pointed at the board. In 2007, 10 girls went missing in Grovefield over the course of the last week in October. But first there was nothing. No outrage, no police response, no nothing. Grovefield or Gravesfield, I should say, covered it up. The longer Arjun talked, the more murderous he looked. I looked into it. The 5 girls that disappeared first, Christine Polanski, for example. He pointed to a mugshot of a small, smarmy girl with dishwater blonde hair. Burnouts, Christine especially, constantly in and out of rehab. She was 15 years old and a drug addict, living on the street. Still to this day, the police haven't filed a missing persons report for her. And I frowned. So, what makes you think she's missing? Maybe she just ran away. But he was shaking his head. I talked to what's left of Christine's family. They haven't spoken to her in years. He looked over at me. The bare light bulbs above through his face in sharp relief. 15 years to be exact. I was trying to wrap my head around it. The faces in the photographs staring down at me. The overwhelming amount of internet printouts of conspiracy theories and reports of missing persons reported from inside Yosemite National Park. I was starting to make my head swim. And finally, I had to ask. So, I know the story. I know. The conspiracy theories, the rumors about that week. And I tried to swallow, but my throat, I felt sticky. But how does Paula fit into this? Her name left a bitter taste in my mouth. And fuck, Daphne? Louise's sister? Daphne wasn't a burnout, and neither was Paula. Arjun didn't even notice my discomfort. He was too wrapped up into what he was looking at. Kristen, Missy, Dana, Mary and Ali Dandale all disappeared on the same day, the Monday of the last week in October. He paused. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. And Milo suddenly sneezed, scaring us. Then on Wednesday, Daphne and 3 of her best friends disappeared. They were having a sleepover at Daphne's house. The next morning, gone. Vanished in the middle of the night. And he turned to me, and I could feel him looking at me. Then Paula disappeared. She was the last. On that Friday of the last week of October. My heart was thudding uncomfortably. I felt hot and dizzy, and I could feel tears beginning to burn on the corners of my eyes. Angrily, I wiped them away. I couldn't look at the board anymore. I looked away. There were big filing cabinets next to the corkboard with enormous binders stacked on top. 1962 to 2007 was written in big bold black letters on the binder at the very top, and I felt sick. Who do you think you are? Not telling me about this sooner. My stomach, coated with thick layers of grime and bile from the past 15 years, felt ready to explode. Why the fuck didn't you tell me about this earlier? Arjun seemed taken aback by the violence in my words. Amy, His face twisted. I'm sorry, I didn't. This is my sister you're investigating. My voice cracked. I jabbed my finger hard into his shoulder. My life, and you didn't think to tell me about this? I shoved my fist into my pockets of my sweatpants. I was afraid that if I didn't, I would use those fists on him instead. You're just like everyone else who gawked and laughed and looked at my life like some morbid roadside attraction. Who the fuck do you think you are? And I could feel myself shaking like a leaf, and I turned to go, but Arjun blocked the door. This wasn't my intention, Amy. I love you. You know that. And he grabbed my shoulders, and I couldn't move. Arjun was a big dude, and he towered over all the other kids, even the ones on his basketball team. Ever since this tragedy occurred to you and to Louise, I never stopped thinking about it. Not once. I never stopped wondering about it. And it wasn't until last year, when all of my courses were moved online, did I even have time to start looking into it. And now with this, he gestured to my phone. I think we finally have proof that there's something going on. His eyes burned deep into mine. We have proof. And I pulled away and wiped my eyes. Have you mentioned this to... But Arjun didn't even let me finish. He scoffed loudly, the noise scaring Milo. Mention it? You remember the police's reaction to your dad, and to everyone else that tried to look into it. He had Monroe's right ear between his thumb and forefinger, and was absent-mindedly rubbing it. A nervous habit back from when we were kids. No way. I even tried talking about this with Louise once, and she shut me down, hard. She kept insisting that Daphne was alive. Wouldn't hear another word otherwise. Kicked me out of her house. Wait, she said what? I blurted out accusingly. What else did she say? She said... Arjun started and then glanced at me sideways. Damn, you guys still don't talk, do you? What did she say, Arjun? That Daphne is alive. He smacked his lips hard at the last word. Because, according to Louise, Daphne has been sending her letters for the past 6 years. And I felt my heart freeze, and for the first time since Paula came back, I felt the tiniest flutter of hope. Holy crap, Arjun! We need to see those letters. Yeah, no kidding. But I doubt she'll let us. But Arjun suddenly froze. He was silent for a moment, and then held up a finger. Do you hear that? And I held my breath. It was silent. The HVAC suddenly kicked on and started humming loudly. Hear what? Shh. Arjun whispered, listening intently. Thud, thud. My heart was beginning to pound. He looked at me, his dark eyes wide. Amy? He asked slowly. Does anyone know you're here? No, I didn't tell any. Then suddenly I heard it. The crunching of tires on gravel. Arjun looked at me. The basement was suddenly suffocating. We need to go, now. He grabbed Monroe's collar and rushed for the door. He threw it open and bolted up the stairs. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I took one last look at the corkboard. Paula's face stared down at me, her eyes burning through the photographs. I'm so sorry, Paula. Please forgive me. In my desperation, I grabbed the 2 binders at the very top of the filing cabinets. They were excruciatingly heavy. Amy, let's go! I rushed upstairs. Arjun was standing at the top of the staircase, peeking around the hallway. He was looking at something. He had 2 large duffel bags with him. My dark blue one that I hadn't even unpacked, and a bright green one. Monroe was clipped into her harness, and Milo was still strapped into the baby one. Monroe was barking furiously at the front door. Her thick black hair stood on end, and I gasped. There were 4 enormous black SUVs racing up the gravel road to Arjun's duplex. Dirt and dust were kicked up, ballooning into an enormous cloud. It was racing straight towards us. Arjun? I whispered. We need to leave. We need to go. What are we going to do? Cars parked behind us. His face was white, ashy. We gotta make a break for it. There's a back way to the main road out of town. If we can just... 2 things suddenly happened at once. The front bay window, with its gorgeous inlay of green and blue stained glass, suddenly exploded. Then Arjun, covered in blue and green shards, fell to the ground screaming. His right leg was shattered, and I could see bones sticking out through the shin. Monroe then started losing it. She started charging at the front door, putting Arjun along in the process. No, Monroe! Without thinking, I grabbed Arjun and hoisted them up. He was crying, tears running down his face as I pulled his arm over my shoulder. Slipping on the broken glass, I half-yanked, half-shoved all 4 of us to the back door. Monroe was barking furiously, with foam literally dripping from her mouth. I kicked open the back door, and there, the dark red Pontiac was right underneath us. keys, Arjun!" I screamed, but he wasn't paying attention to me. I could hear the SUV's brakes screaming as they squealed to a stop, and I tried the car door. Thank God it was unlocked. I threw the duffel bags into the back seat and threw Arjun in after. "Arjun, the keys! Give me the keys! I need to get you to a hospital." But he wasn't listening to me. I threw myself into the back seat and desperately tried searching his pockets. "Is Milo okay?" Arjun was bleeding everywhere. "Is my baby okay? Is Milo okay? Oh, God!" He was out of his mind and I could tell I was losing him. I sat up and slapped him. "He's fine!" I yelled. "Where did you put the keys?" And suddenly there was an explosion of glass. The passenger side window exploded, with glass and metal flying everywhere. I threw up my arm, but it was too late. The shard sliced deeply into my face, and Monroe lost her mind. Her eyes shining a bright white, foam dripping from her lips, and her black fur standing on end. She started throwing herself at the door, and Arjun, sobbing, tried to hold her back. There! My heart stopped. I held up the keys. Gotcha! And with a deafening roar, the Pontiac howled to life. I whipped the car around, grinding the tires into the asphalt. An overwhelming smell of burning rubber flooded through the broken window. The back road from Arjun's duplex cut through a dense thicket of forestry that separated his isolated complex from the rest of town. He had to take a sharp right into the forest, and that led straight through to the downtown area. The road was bumpy and full of treacherously deep potholes, but I knew we'd be safe if we managed to make it into the thick vegetation. "Oh, he's gonna die in the back seat," I thought to myself. I couldn't catch my breath. I could feel myself on the very edge of a massive panic attack. First Paula, now him. I can't let him die. I won't let this happen again. "Stay with me, Arjun." I glanced back at him. He looked pale. "You'll be okay, buddy. Hang in there, buddy. You'll be..." "Okay, I love you, but shut up, Amy." Arjun grunted, spitting up glass. "No hospitals. Take me to Jack." And I was flabbergasted. "Arjun, you got a fucking bone sticking out. Jack and his Boy Scout first aid skills aren't going to help you." "God damn it, no hospitals!" Arjun screamed. "Go to Jack's. He's staying at his dad's house." "Okay, fine," I yelled back. "Fine," I said again, quieter. "But only because you're dying, Arjun. Only reason I'm going to my ex's house." We were about to take the turn away from Arjun's duplex, and I glanced quickly one last time in the rearview mirror to make sure we weren't being followed. A flash of bright white light caught my eye. A man, dressed in an all-white suit, was standing at the back door. He was pale, even paler than I, and his blonde hair was slicked straight back. And on his right wrist was a thick, black bracelet, like the ones we used to purchase from Hot Topic. The arsehole was waving goodbye. I flipped him off. Wow. Sadly, another one. Wow. What a fantastic story this is turning out to be. I can't wait for the update or the finale. Of course, a huge thank you to the incredible author, AgonyBlue, from over on Reddit, No Sleep. Big thank you, Agony, for allowing me to narrate the story on the show. I really hope you enjoy my rendition, and I look forward to any updates in the future. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. Well, it really does help build the channel and the community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email, which is as on screen. Contact thedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everyone's had a fantastic week at work or school, or perhaps you're a long distance driver. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and giving it your all. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry. There was a reporter waiting outside the hospital as I pulled up. The forest ranger had let it slip to his girlfriend that distress The distress. But the truth is, it wasn't that I couldn't tell the cops. It was that I had already tired. My parents took me to therapy about a month after her disappearance. My mother. He had Monroe's right ear between his thumb and forefinger. Was absent. Oh, fuck you. My dark blue one that I hadn't even unpacked, and a bright green one. Monroe was clipped into her. Monroe was clipped into her harness, and Milo was still strapped into the baby born.